I never believed evil could wear the face of love until March 13th, 2015, when my own son violated me in our family shower while my husband orchestrated it from his office downtown. The water was still running when I realized my 30-year marriage and 25 years of motherhood had been built on lies. I'm Laura Peterson, and at 62, I'm finally ready to tell you how I survived the ultimate betrayal and turned my nightmare into a mission to help others. What happened that Friday evening in Seattle would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, but it would also reveal a strength I never knew I possessed. This is the story of how two men I loved more than life itself conspired to destroy me, and how I fought back with evidence, courage, and an unshakable belief that justice was possible, even in the darkest circumstances. Our life in Ballard looked picture perfect from the outside, like something you'd see in a home and garden magazine. Tom Peterson, 53, was a respected senior accountant at Morrison & Associates, always impeccably dressed in his navy suits with crisp white shirts that I pressed every Sunday evening. I taught 4th grade at Whitman Elementary, where parents fought to get their children into my classroom, a fact that filled me with quiet pride until I learned to hide it from Tom. Our son, Alex, 25, had just graduated from the University of Washington with an environmental science degree summa cum laude. He'd been accepted to graduate school at Stanford, but deferred to take a gap year and help with family finances. At least, that's what he told his friends. The truth was more complicated, as truth often is, in families that appear flawless on the surface. The house itself seemed to reflect our success, a beautifully restored 1920s craftsman with original hardwood floors that creaked in familiar patterns, a modern kitchen that I'd fought for during our 2010 renovation, and a garden that Tom meticulously maintained every weekend with the dedication of a man trying to control something in his increasingly uncontrollable world. Neighbors often stopped to compliment his roses, the way he'd trained Jasmine to climb our front trellis, how he'd managed to keep our lawn green through Seattle's dry summers. "You Petersons have it all figured out," our neighbor Janet would say, coffee mug in hand, as she watched Tom deadhead flowers with surgical precision. "Stable jobs, successful kid, beautiful home. The rest of us are just trying to keep up." I'd smile and thank her, never mentioning the way Tom's jaw would tighten whenever Alex slept past 10 a.m., or how he'd started questioning every dollar I spent at the grocery store, or the growing silences at our dinner table that felt heavy with unspoken resentments. But perfection was an illusion we'd all agreed to maintain, and the cracks had been showing for years if you knew where to look. Tom had grown increasingly controlling since 2012, though I'd rationalized his behavior as financial responsibility during tough economic times. Every Sunday after dinner, he'd spread our monthly expenses across the dining room table receipts, organized by category calculator, within easy-reach reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed every purchase I'd made during the week. "Laura, we need to discuss this grocery receipt." He'd say, his tone patient, but with an edge that made my stomach clench. "Organic vegetables are a luxury we can't afford with Alex's student loans still looming over us." "And what's this charge at the bookstore? More classroom supplies?" "Tom, my salary covers groceries comfortably." I'd respond, trying to keep my voice level. "And yes, I bought books for students whose families can't afford them. It's not coming out of our family budget. I use my classroom supplies allowance." He'd shake his head with that patient smile that made me feel like a child being gently corrected by a wise adult. "It's not about the money, sweetheart. It's about making smart choices together. We're a team. Remember, teams communicate before making decisions." The word team had become weaponized in our household, a way to make his controlling behavior sound reasonable, collaborative, even. When I wanted to attend a weekend teaching conference in Portland, we needed to discuss it as a team. When I suggested Alex might benefit from career counseling, Tom would remind me that team decisions required consensus. The real tension began when my teaching salary surpassed his accounting income in 2014. Seattle's teacher pay had increased significantly due to successful union negotiations and my additional income from curriculum development work during summers. Meanwhile, His firm struggled with competition from larger companies offering the same services at lower prices. 3 longtime clients had left Morrison and Associates that year, taking their substantial accounts elsewhere. I watched his jaw tighten whenever neighbors mentioned my recent Teacher of the Year award, or when the local newspaper ran a feature about innovative educators that included my photograph and a quote about empowering young minds to think critically about their world. Must be nice having a wife who's the breadwinner now. Our neighbor Rick joked at a neighborhood barbecue last summer, beer in hand, and grass stains on his khakis from chasing his kids around the yard. Maybe she can keep you in the style you've grown accustomed to, Tom? The men around the grill laughed, the kind of uncomfortable laughter that happens when someone makes a joke that hits too close to home. Tom joined in, but I noticed his hand gripping his beer bottle until his knuckles went white, and he was unusually quiet for the rest of the evening. Rick was just kidding around. I told him later, as we got ready for bed, watching him hang his polo shirt with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. Was he, because it seems like everyone's noticed that my wife makes more money than I do now? It's humiliating, Laura. Do you understand that there's nothing humiliating about being married to a successful woman, Tom? I'm proud of your work, too. Easy for you to say. You're not the one being emasculated at every social gathering. You're not the one whose neighbors think he's some kind of kept man. The word hung between us like a slap. I'd never heard Tom use language like that before, never seen that particular combination of shame and anger in his eyes. I should have recognized it as more than wounded pride. I should have understood that Tom's sense of self was fracturing under the weight of changing gender roles and economic realities he couldn't control. Instead, I tried to be supportive while maintaining my own career momentum. I'd compliment his work when clients called with praise, mention his expertise, when friends asked for financial advice, find subtle ways to reinforce his competence and value. But nothing seemed to ease the growing tension in his shoulders the way he'd stare at nothing during dinner, lost in thoughts he wouldn't share. Alex's return home after graduation brought different stresses. The confident young man who'd debated environmental policy with professors and won a prestigious internship with the EPA during his junior year now spent days in his childhood bedroom, door closed, emerging only for meals eaten in increasingly uncomfortable silence. His room still looked like a teenager's sanctuary: debate team trophies on shelves, environmental science textbooks stacked beside Harry Potter novels. He'd never quite outgrown a map of national parks he'd planned to visit during college, but never found time for. The juxtaposition of adult aspirations and childhood remnants felt tragic in ways I couldn't articulate. The job market's brutal, he told me during one of our few conversations, that autumn stirring sugar into his coffee, with more attention than the task required. Everyone wants 5 years of experience for entry-level positions. I've sent out over 300 applications and gotten maybe 15 responses, all rejections. What about the contacts you made during your internship, the supervisor who wrote your recommendation letter? His laugh was bitter, nothing like the easy humor he'd inherited from my side of the family. They're nice enough when I call, but there's always some excuse. Budget cuts, hiring freezes, internal candidates who have priority. Dr. Morgan at EPA said she'd keep me in mind if anything opens up, but that was 6 months ago. And what about graduate school? You could still... Dad thinks I should give up on environmental work and get into accounting like him. Says it's stable that I'm being naive, thinking I can save the world when I can't even save myself from living in my childhood bedroom. The pain in his voice cut through me. Alex had been such a confident child captain of his high school debate team, president of the environmental club, voted most likely to change the world by his senior class. His valedictorian speech had brought tears to my eyes as he talked about using his education to address climate change and environmental justice. Watching his self-esteem crumble under the weight of rejection after rejection was painful for any mother, but I'd convinced myself that this was just a rough patch, that his confidence would return once he found his footing in the adult world. What do you think about your father's suggestion? I asked, carefully knowing this was delicate territory. I think Dad's tired of supporting a failure. He reminds me daily that I'm costing him money while contributing nothing to the household. Maybe he's right. Maybe I should just give up on my dreams and be practical. These conversations broke my heart. I'd raised Alex to follow his passions, to believe he could make a difference in the world. Hearing him talk about abandoning those dreams felt like watching him die a little each day. I should have paid more attention to the late-night conversations between Tom and Alex in the garage, voices too low to understand, but tones increasingly urgent. I should have questioned why Tom suddenly needed to upgrade our home security with equipment I never saw installed. I should have wondered why Alex started looking at me with something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't love either, a calculating assessment that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. During family dinners, I'd catch them exchanging glances that felt loaded with meaning I couldn't decipher. When I'd ask if everything was okay, they'd both smile and change the subject, but the undercurrent of tension was palpable, like the electrical charge in the air before a thunderstorm. Maybe Alex should see a counselor. I suggested to Tom one evening, after our son had been particularly moody, snapping at me for asking if he'd heard back from any job applications. Job searching can trigger depression, especially for young people who expected their degree to open more doors. Alex doesn't need therapy, Tom replied, not looking up from the financial papers spread across our coffee table. He needs motivation. Maybe if we stopped coddling him, he'd find the drive to actually get hired somewhere. I'm not coddling him. I'm being supportive during a difficult time. There's a difference between support and enabling, Laura. You treat him like he's still 12 years old instead of a grown man who needs to take responsibility for his life. The criticism stung because part of me wondered if it might be true. Was I being overprotective? Had I somehow failed to prepare Alex for the realities of adult life? These doubts would later be weaponized against me in ways I couldn't imagine. Instead of addressing the growing tension directly, I focused on being the perfect wife and mother, believing that patience and understanding would solve whatever crisis was brewing in our home. I brought Alex job listings I found online, offered to help him network through my teaching colleagues, who might know people in environmental organizations, and tried to create a peaceful home environment where he could decompress from the stress of unemployment. None of it mattered. I was treating symptoms while ignoring the disease that was already spreading through our family like a cancer. Looking back now, 7 years later, the warning signs were everywhere, scattered like breadcrumbs, that I was too trusting, too naive, too committed to believing in the fundamental goodness of my family to follow. Tom's behavior had shifted in subtle ways that I attributed to work stress and midlife anxiety, never suspecting the calculated campaign that was already being waged against my sense of security and autonomy. He began asking detailed questions about my daily schedule with the persistence of someone conducting surveillance rather than making conversation. "What time are you leaving school today?" He'd ask over breakfast, while spreading butter on his toast, with the same methodical precision he applied to everything else. "Which route are you taking home? Any errands you need to run?" When I'd mentioned stopping at the grocery store or pharmacy, he'd follow up with more questions. "Which store? How long do you think you'll be? Should I start dinner if you're running late?" "Just want to coordinate our evenings better," he'd explain when I commented on his sudden interest in my movements. "It's more efficient if we plan together instead of assuming what the other person is doing." The word efficient had joined team in Tom's vocabulary of control, disguised as consideration. Everything needed to be planned, coordinated, approved through the family chain of command that he'd somehow appointed himself to lead. The home security upgrade happened over a weekend in February 2015 when I was visiting my sister Marie in Portland. Tom had insisted I go. Marie was going through a difficult divorce and needed support, he said, and it would give him time to handle some household projects without disrupting my routine. I returned Sunday evening to find him in an unusually good mood, humming, while he prepared dinner, something he rarely did anymore. "How did your projects go?" I asked, looking around for evidence of his work. "Great. I had the security system upgraded while you were gone. It was a surprise, a way to make you feel safer in our neighborhood after those break-ins on Maple Street." I hadn't heard about break-ins on Maple Street, but Seattle neighborhoods were always dealing with petty crime. The explanation seemed reasonable, even thoughtful. Where's the new equipment? I don't see any obvious changes. The technician said the best security is invisible security. Tom explained, washing dishes with unusual enthusiasm. It's all integrated into existing systems' motion sensors that look like smoke detectors, wireless cameras disguised as decorative fixtures, that kind of thing. Very high-tech, very discreet. Can you show me how it works? The system's not fully configured yet. The monitoring company is still setting up the software and testing all the connections. I'll give you a complete tutorial once everything's online and properly calibrated. That tutorial never came. Instead, Tom would occasionally mention adjusting camera angles or checking motion sensor sensitivity, but whenever I expressed interest in learning the system myself, he'd defer to next week or when I have more time to explain everything properly. Around the same time, Tom started working later hours, claiming increased client demands as tax season approached. Morrison and Associates had always been busy during tax season, so the explanation made sense. What didn't make sense were the inconsistencies I began to notice. When I called his office one evening to ask if he wanted me to save dinner, his secretary, Diane, mentioned that he'd left at his normal time. When I asked him about the discrepancy later, he seemed annoyed rather than embarrassed. I was at the downtown branch working on the Hendersons' estate planning. Complex trusts require specialized software that's only available at the main office. Sometimes I don't update my calendar when I'm working off-site. These explanations were always reasonable, always delivered with the patient tone of someone dealing with unnecessary questions. But they created a pattern of small deceptions that made me feel like I was losing my grip on the basic facts of our shared life. I started paying attention to other details, the way Tom would check his phone constantly during dinner, responding to texts with cryptic messages that he'd delete immediately after sending. The way he'd moved his laptop to his home office and password-protected files that had never been secured before. The way he'd started showering immediately after coming home from work, even on days when he claimed to have been sitting in meetings all afternoon. You seem distracted lately? I mentioned one evening while we watched the news together, or rather while I watched, and he stared at his phone screen. Just work stuff. The Henderson situation is more complicated than I initially thought. The Hendersons again. I'd met Harold and Ruth Henderson at a few firm parties over the years, a sweet elderly couple who'd been Morrison and Associates clients for decades. Harold was a retired Boeing engineer, methodical and thorough, but hardly the type to require weeks of complex estate planning. Alex's behavior during this period was equally concerning, but in different ways. His mood swings intensified, alternating between periods of manic energy, where he'd talk about job applications and future plans, and deep depressions, where he'd barely acknowledge my existence. During his energetic phases, he'd emerge from his room with renewed purpose, updating his resume, researching companies, making plans to attend networking events. But these bursts of activity never lasted more than a few days before giving way to darker moods that could stretch for weeks. During his low periods, he'd make comments that felt designed to hurt, observations about my character, and choices that seemed crafted to undermine my confidence. "No wonder I can't get hired," he said one evening after another rejection email, stirring his dinner around his plate without eating. "Look at the example I had growing up. A father who can't even control his own household, and a mother who thinks she knows better than everyone else. Alex, that's completely unfair and hurtful. Is it Dad works his ass off while you get praised for doing a job any college graduate could handle? Meanwhile, I'm stuck living in my childhood bedroom because the job market's impossible, and my parents are too busy competing with each other to actually help me." These outbursts shocked me. Alex had always been respectful, even during his most challenging teenage years. This new cruelty felt like a stranger wearing my son's face, someone who knew exactly which words would inflict the most damage. Tom would often nod approvingly during these episodes, occasionally adding his own commentary that felt rehearsed, coordinated. "Your mother has strong opinions about how everyone else should live their lives," he'd say, not looking at me while he spoke. "But she's never had to struggle for real success like we have. Teaching is a noble profession, but it's not the same as competing in the business world." The dismissal of my career, 30 years of dedicated service to children and families, felt like a physical blow. I'd won awards, mentored new teachers, developed curriculum that was being used in districts across the state. But suddenly, my work was being characterized as easy, insignificant something any college graduate could do. I began walking on eggshells in my own home, afraid that any comment might trigger another coordinated attack on my character. The house that had once felt like a sanctuary became a minefield of hidden tensions and unspoken resentments. Simple conversations became fraught with danger. If I suggested we try a new restaurant, Tom would question the expense, and Alex would comment on my impulsive decision-making. If I mentioned something interesting that had happened at school, Tom would change the subject, and Alex would roll his eyes at my need to be the center of attention. Even my efforts to help Alex with his job search were reframed as evidence of my controlling nature. When I found a position that seemed perfect for his background and forwarded him the listing, he accused me of treating him like a child who couldn't manage his own career. When I offered to help him practice interview skills, Tom suggested that my hovering was probably contributing to Alex's lack of confidence. I felt like I was losing my mind, questioning my own perceptions and motivations in ways that were completely foreign to my normally confident personality. Was I really controlling? Had I somehow emasculated my husband and infantilized my son without realizing it? Was my success in teaching making me arrogant in other areas of life? These doubts would later be revealed as the intended outcome of a carefully orchestrated psychological campaign designed to make me doubt my own reality. But at the time, they felt like genuine self-reflection evidence that maybe I needed to change my approach to family relationships. March 13th, 2015 began like any ordinary Friday, with no indication that it would become the dividing line between the life I'd known and the nightmare I was about to enter. I taught my fourth graders about fractions using pizza slices and chocolate bars to make the concept concrete for minds that still thought in pictures rather than abstractions. During lunch, I helped Sarah Martinez with her reading comprehension, watching her face light up as a particularly challenging passage finally made sense. The drive home took longer than usual due to construction on Market Street, but I didn't mind the delay. Seattle's spring weather was finally emerging from months of gray drizzle, and I found myself thinking about weekend plans as I sat in traffic. Alex had mentioned possibly driving to Vancouver to visit his college roommate, the first social initiative he'd shown in months. Maybe this was a sign that his depression was lifting, that he was ready to re-engage with the world beyond our increasingly tense household. Tom called around 4 p.m. as I was organizing lesson plans for Monday, his voice carrying the familiar tone of controlled efficiency that had become his default mode of communication. "I have a late client meeting with the Hendersons," he said, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "Their estate planning is more complicated than expected, and they can only meet after their regular work hours. How late do you think you'll be?" "Probably not back until 9 or 10. Don't wait up if you're tired. You know how these elderly clients can be. They want to discuss every detail 3 times. Make sure they understand all the implications." I'd met Harold and Ruth Henderson at Morrison & Associates holiday parties over the years. Harold was a retired Boeing engineer with the methodical personality that came from decades of working with complex systems. Ruth was a former librarian who asked thoughtful questions and took careful notes. The explanation of a lengthy evening meeting made perfect sense for clients with their attention to detail. "Should I save you some dinner?" "Don't worry about it. I'll grab something on the way home if I get hungry." Alex said he'd help with dinner prep, which is nice of him. It was nice of him and completely out of character for the withdrawn young man who'd been treating me like an inconvenience for the past several months. But I was grateful for any sign of engagement from my son, any indication that the old Alex might still exist beneath the layers of disappointment and resentment. When I arrived home, Alex was in the kitchen, examining the contents of our refrigerator with unusual interest. He'd showered and changed into clean clothes, small details that stood out because his hygiene had become sporadic during his depressive episodes. "Hey, Mom," he said, turning to greet me with something that almost resembled his old smile. "Thought I'd actually be useful for once and get dinner started. There's chicken in the freezer that needs defrosting, right?" That would be wonderful, sweetheart. There should be fresh vegetables in the crisper drawer, and I think there's pasta in the pantry if you want to make something simple. Don't worry about it. I've got it covered. Why don't you go relax? Take one of your long showers. You look tired. His concern should have warmed my heart, but instead, it triggered a vague unease I couldn't identify. Alex hadn't shown genuine concern for my well-being in months. His sudden attentiveness felt forced, like a performance, rather than authentic care. Are you feeling okay? I asked, studying his face for signs of fever or illness that might explain his unusual behavior. I'm fine. Better than fine, actually. I've been thinking about some things, making some decisions about my future. But we can talk about that later. Go on, take your shower. I'll have everything ready when you're done. I kissed his forehead. He still smelled like the shampoo he'd used since high school, and headed upstairs, telling myself that this was what recovery looked like. Depression didn't lift gradually. Sometimes it broke like a fever, leaving the person refreshed and ready to engage with life again. The bathroom was my sanctuary, a space I'd renovated 5 years earlier, with soft blue walls that reminded me of morning sky heated floors that felt luxurious against bare feet, and a rainfall showerhead that could ease the tension from hours spent hunched over tiny desks. Teaching 32 fourth graders was physically demanding, and at 53, I felt every hour spent on my feet. I lit my vanilla candle, a Friday ritual that marked the transition from Laura the teacher to Laura, the wife and mother, and let the hot water build steam while I chose comfortable clothes for the evening. Perhaps Alex and I could have a real conversation over dinner, maybe make progress on whatever decisions he'd mentioned about his future. The thought filled me with cautious optimism. As steam filled the room, I stepped under the rainfall showerhead and let the hot water work its magic on my shoulders. The tension of managing classroom dynamics, parent concerns, and administrative demands began to dissolve. Friday evenings were sacred to me, the moment when I could finally exhale after a week of caring for everyone else's needs. I was shampooing my hair, eyes closed against the soap, when I heard the bathroom door open with a soft click that barely registered over the sound of running water. "Oh, Mom." Alex's voice came through the steam, closer than it should have been. "I'm fine, honey." I called back, assuming he needed something from the medicine cabinet. "Just give me 10 minutes and I'll help with dinner." But instead of leaving, I heard footsteps on the tile floor, deliberate, purposeful steps that made my skin prickle with inexplicable dread. Through the frosted shower door, I saw his silhouette approaching, tall and broad-shouldered, unmistakably my son, but moving with an intention that made my stomach clench. "Alex, what are you doing in here?" I asked, reaching for the shower door handle to peek out. The shower door flew open with a violence that sent water spraying across the bathroom floor. Alex stood there with an expression I'd never seen before, desperate and angry, but also strangely empty, as if he'd disconnected from his own actions. "I'm sorry, Mom," he whispered, but his voice carried no genuine remorse. The words sounded rehearsed, like lines he'd been coached to deliver. "But Dad says this is the only way you'll learn to respect us." The phrase "Dad says" hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't Alex's breakdown. This was something orchestrated, planned, discussed between them like a strategy meeting. What happened next will haunt me forever. Alex, the boy I'd nursed through fevers and heartbreak, grabbed me with hands that were supposed to protect, not harm. The violation was swift and brutal, accompanied by words that turned my stomach and shattered my understanding of the person I'd raised. "You think you run this house?" He panted against my ear while I struggled uselessly against his superior strength. "You think your teacher salary makes you the boss of everyone? But you don't control us anymore. Dad's tired of being disrespected, and I'm tired of being treated like a failure." I couldn't scream. My voice seemed to have disappeared along with my ability to comprehend what was happening. My mind simply couldn't process that my own child was raping me while speaking words that sounded rehearsed, practiced like a speech he'd memorized for this moment. The physical pain was excruciating, but it was nothing compared to the psychological destruction occurring in real time. This was Alex, who'd once made me Mother's Day cards with crayon drawings of our family holding hands, who'd cried in my arms after his first girlfriend broke his heart, who'd hugged me so tightly at his college graduation that I joked about needing air. As the assault continued, I found myself staring at the vanilla candle flickering on the counter, its innocent light a stark contrast to the horror unfolding in my sanctuary. The irony was too cruel. I'd lit that candle to mark the transition to my safe space, my time for peace and restoration. When it ended, after minutes that felt like hours, Alex stepped back, avoiding my eyes. Water continued cascading around us, but nothing would ever wash away what had just happened.
Dad said to tell you that you brought this on yourself with your attitude, he said in a voice that sounded hollow mechanical. Maybe now you'll show some respect for the men in your family instead of acting like you know everything.
He left me collapsed against the shower wall, legs unable to support my weight, arms wrapped around my torso in a futile attempt at protection that had come far too late. The water was still running hot, but I felt frozen, disconnected from my body and my reality. I don't know how long I stayed there, but eventually the water began to run cold, shocking me back to awareness of my physical surroundings. The vanilla candle had burned lower, wax pooling on the counter, evidence that time had passed, that this nightmare had really happened. When I finally found the strength to move, I wrapped myself in my terry cloth robe and stumbled downstairs on legs that felt disconnected from my body. Each step was a monumental effort, my brain struggling to coordinate basic motor functions while processing the unthinkable. Alex stood at the stove stirring pasta sauce as if nothing had happened, and the normalcy of the scene made everything feel surreal, like I'd imagined the assault or suffered some kind of psychotic break. He'd changed clothes, styled his hair, and was actually humming a song I recognized from his high school chorus concerts. The kitchen smelled like garlic and herbs, domestic and comforting in a way that felt like mockery. "Perfect timing, Mom," he said without turning around, his voice bright and cheerful. "Dinner's almost ready. Just need to drain the pasta and we'll be all set." I stood in the doorway, unable to move or speak my mind, frantically trying to reconcile the young man cooking dinner with the person who had just violated me. Was I losing my mind? Had the stress of work and family tensions caused some kind of breakdown? "Alex," I whispered, my voice barely recognizable even to myself. What just happened upstairs?" He turned from the stove wooden spoon, dripping red sauce that looked too much like blood in my traumatized state. For a moment, I saw the boy who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms, who'd cried when our elderly cat died, who'd once written a school essay about how I was his hero. But something in his eyes remained cold, calculating, as if he was evaluating my reaction to determine his next move.
"I don't know what you mean," he said, tilting his head with manufactured confusion. "You took a shower, I made dinner. What's the problem?"
The gaslighting was immediate and expertly delivered. For a terrifying moment, I almost believed him, almost convinced myself that trauma had created false memories. But my body knew the truth. I could still feel the violation, still smell his cologne on my skin, despite the shower. "Alex, you hurt me. You came into the bathroom and I couldn't say the word rape. Somehow, speaking it aloud would make it real in a way I wasn't prepared to handle. Tears began streaming down his face, genuine tears that made him look like the child he'd once been. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. But you don't understand the pressure I'm under." The admission hit me like a physical blow. It had really happened. My son had really assaulted me. Dad says if I don't find a job soon, he'll cut me off completely. Alex continued, his voice breaking with what seemed like genuine anguish. "He'll kick me out with nothing, and I'll lose everything: my health insurance, my car, any chance of paying off my student loans. I'll be homeless, Mom. Homeless with a degree nobody wants. So you decided to rape me." The word finally came out raw and ugly in our cheerful kitchen. He flinched, visibly dropping the wooden spoon.
It wasn't supposed to be like that. Dad said it would just scare you, make you realize you can't control everything in this house. He said you needed to understand that your attitude has consequences for all of us.
My attitude, I felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole where familiar words no longer had recognizable meanings. The way you dismiss Dad's opinions, the way you treat me like I'm still a child who can't make his own decisions. Dad explained it all to me, how you've been undermining both of us, making us feel weak and dependent. He said sometimes families need dramatic interventions to reset unhealthy dynamics. The clinical language, the way he'd been coached to reframe sexual assault as family therapy, made my blood run cold. This wasn't Alex's psychological breakdown. This was something much more calculated and sinister. Alex, what you did was rape. It was a serious crime. You understand that, don't you?
It wasn't really rape, Mom. Not like stranger rape. This was family business, a way to remind you that your independence has limits. Dad says you'll thank us eventually, once you realize how much better our family functions when everyone knows their role.
The words sounded foreign coming from my son's mouth, like he was reciting a script written by someone else. I began to understand that whatever had happened to me was part of a larger plan, something that had been discussed and orchestrated in those late-night garage conversations I'd been too trusting to investigate. Please don't tell anyone. Alex continued, his tears falling harder now. Please, Mom. It'll never happen again, I swear on Grandma's grave. But if you report this, it'll destroy my life. No job will ever hire me. No woman will ever want to be with me. I'll be branded as a sex offender for the rest of my life. The shame was overwhelming, crushing my chest, until breathing became work. How do you call the police on your own child? How do you explain to neighbors, friends, colleagues that your family isn't what it appears to be? How do you destroy a young man's future over something that lasted only minutes? But even as these thoughts paralyzed me, a small voice in my mind whispered that Alex was more concerned about consequences for himself than the trauma he'd inflicted on me. His tears seemed genuine, but they were for his own situation, not for what he'd done to his mother. I need time to think, I said, finally, my voice stronger than I felt. I need time to process what happened here. Of course, Mom. Take all the time you need, but remember, I'm still your son. I made a terrible mistake, but I'm still the boy you raised. Don't let one awful moment destroy our family. The manipulation was subtle, but effective. He was asking me to choose between my own sense of justice and my love for him, betting that maternal love would override my need for accountability. For the next 6 weeks, I said nothing to anyone outside our house. I cooked dinner and graded papers and attended parent conferences while dying inside. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in that shower, feeling helpless and violated by the person I'd loved most in the world. Tom returned home that evening, acting perfectly normal, asking about my day, and complimenting the dinner Alex had prepared. If he knew what his son had done, and I was beginning to suspect he not only knew but had orchestrated it, he showed no sign of guilt or concern. You seem quiet tonight, honey, he said during dessert, studying my face with what looked like clinical interest. Everything okay? Just tired. It's been a long week. You work too hard? Maybe you should consider scaling back your extracurricular activities at school. Focus more on home and family instead of trying to save every troubled kid in Seattle. The suggestion felt loaded with meaning I couldn't quite grasp. Tom had never criticized my dedication to teaching before, but now he seemed to be encouraging me to retreat from the career that gave me independence and fulfillment. My students need those programs, I said weakly. Your family needs you too, Laura. Sometimes I wonder if you remember that. Over the following weeks, I began to notice patterns that had been invisible before the assault, like someone had given me new glasses that revealed hidden details in familiar landscapes. Tom's behavior wasn't just controlling, it was strategic, methodical, designed to isolate me and undermine my confidence in ways so subtle that I'd attributed them to normal marital stress. He started questioning my judgment on everything from grocery purchases to lesson plans, but always in that patient tone that made me feel like the unreasonable one for objecting to his scrutiny. "Are you sure you want to spend money on that organic produce?" he'd ask while reviewing receipts. "It seems wasteful when we're trying to help Alex get back on his feet financially."
Do you really think that creative writing project is appropriate for fourth graders? Maybe you should stick to the standard curriculum instead of experimenting with unproven methods. These constant challenges to my decision-making felt like water torture, individually harmless, but cumulatively devastating to my self-esteem. I began second-guessing choices I'd made confidently for decades, wondering if Tom's criticisms reflected genuine flaws in my judgment. More troubling was how Tom and Alex had begun tag-teaming their criticisms of me like they'd developed a coordinated strategy for undermining my confidence. If I disagreed with Tom about household decisions, Alex would inevitably side with his father, often adding commentary that felt rehearsed. "Mom always thinks she knows best," Alex said one evening when I suggested he might benefit from career counseling. "She can't accept that other people might have different approaches to problem solving. Your mother has very strong opinions." Tom agreed, nodding as if this was a long-standing family problem we'd all acknowledged. "Sometimes it's hard for her to see that her way isn't the only way." These coordinated attacks on my character felt orchestrated, like they'd discussed strategy before confronting me. The realization that my husband and son might be actively working together against me was almost as traumatic as the assault itself. But it was the small deceptions that really began to disturb me. Tom's story about working late increasingly didn't match reality when I called his office or happened to drive by Morrison and Associates during evening hours. His explanations were always reasonable meetings at other locations, work-from-home projects, client dinners that hadn't been planned in advance. "The Hendersons' estate planning has gotten really complicated," became his standard explanation for any discrepancy in his schedule. "Sometimes I have to meet them at their bank or at the lawyer's office downtown. It's hard to predict how long these sessions will take." 3 weeks after the assault, I made an appointment with Dr. Sarah Chen, a therapist whose office was in Fremont, far enough from our neighborhood that I was unlikely to encounter anyone I knew. I'd found her name online after searching for family trauma counseling during my lunch break at school, using the computer in the library where my browsing history wouldn't be monitored. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth initially, so I claimed I was dealing with work stress and family tensions that were affecting my sleep and concentration. "Tell me about these family tensions," Dr. Chen said during our second session. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a calm presence that made confession feel safer than it had anywhere else. "My son has been struggling since graduation, can't find work, seems depressed and angry much of the time. My husband is very controlling about money and household decisions, questions everything I do. I feel like I'm walking on eggshells in my own home." That sounds incredibly stressful. Has there been any violence or threatening behavior?
The question hung in the air while I wrestled with my answer. How do you tell a stranger that your own son raped you? How do you admit that your 30-year marriage might be built on psychological manipulation disguised as partnership?
Not exactly violence.
I finally said the words, coming out slowly as I tested how they sounded. "But I feel unsafe sometimes. Like they resent me for things I don't understand. Like they're plotting against me in ways I can't quite identify."
Dr. Chen leaned forward slightly, her expression shifting to professional concern.
"Laura, if someone in your family has hurt you physically or sexually, there are resources available. You don't have to handle this alone, and you don't have to protect people who hurt you just because they're family." I wasn't ready to hear that yet, but her words planted a seed that would eventually grow into action. She gave me pamphlets about domestic violence resources and family therapy options, materials I hid in my car's glove compartment like contraband that could get me in trouble if discovered.
Meanwhile, strange incidents at home continued to accumulate. I found the credit card statement Tom had tried to hide, showing an $800 charge to Secure Tech Solutions for residential surveillance equipment. When I confronted him about it, his explanation was smooth and reasonable.
"I haven't told you about this yet because I wanted it to be a surprise," he said, smiling as if he'd been caught planning something wonderful rather than something secretive. After those break-ins on Maple Street, I decided to upgrade our security system. The new equipment is much more sophisticated than our old setup. "I don't see any new equipment. Where did they install everything?"
That's the beauty of modern security technology. It's completely integrated and invisible. The camera lenses look like smoke detector housings. The motion sensors are built into existing light fixtures. You'd never know they were there unless you knew exactly what to look for.
But when I looked carefully for evidence of these installations, I found nothing obvious. No new control panels, no visible cameras, no documentation or warranties that typically accompanied major security upgrades.
"Can you show me how the system works?" I asked. "It's not fully configured yet. The monitoring service is still setting up the software and running diagnostics on all the connections. I'll give you a complete tutorial once everything's online and properly calibrated." That tutorial never came, of course. Instead, Tom would occasionally mention adjusting camera angles or checking motion sensor sensitivity, but whenever I expressed interest in learning the system myself, he'd defer to "next week" or "when I have more time to explain everything properly."
The pattern was becoming clear. Tom was creating elaborate explanations for behavior and purchases that didn't quite make sense always, with just enough detail to sound credible, but never with enough follow-through to be verified. One evening, in late April, I overheard Tom and Alex talking in hushed tones, in the garage, voices low but urgent in a way that made me press my ear against the adjoining kitchen door to catch fragments of their conversation. "She's getting suspicious about the equipment," Alex said, his voice carrying anxiety I hadn't heard since his college finals weeks. That's fine. Let her wonder. The important thing is that she understands the new dynamic in this house," Tom replied, his tone patient but firm, like a teacher explaining a concept to a slow student. "I can't do this anymore, Dad. What we did was wrong on every level. I keep having nightmares about it."
"What you did was necessary." Laura needed to learn that her independence has limits, that her actions have consequences for this entire family. Now she knows what happens when she forgets her place.
The clinical detachment in Tom's voice chilled me. He was discussing my assault like a business strategy, evaluating its effectiveness in achieving desired outcomes.
"But what if she tells someone? What if she goes to the police?" "She won't. She's too ashamed, too worried about protecting your future. And besides, who would believe such a story? A respected accountant and his college graduate son conspiring to assault their wife and mother? It sounds like the fantasy of an unstable woman having a midlife crisis."
The conversation confirmed my worst fears. The assault hadn't been Alex's spontaneous breakdown. It had been planned, orchestrated, discussed between them like a military operation with specific strategic goals. I began my investigation that night, starting with Tom's home office, while he and Alex watched television in the living room. My hands shook as I rifled through filing cabinets and desk drawers, listening for footsteps that would signal someone coming to check on me. During lunch breaks at school, I researched surveillance equipment and keylogger software on library computers, clearing browser histories and using incognito mode to avoid leaving digital trails that might expose my investigation. I'd never been particularly tech-savvy. My classroom still featured more books than computers, but desperation made me a quick learner. I watched YouTube tutorials about hidden cameras, read articles about domestic surveillance, and learned about software that could monitor computer activity without detection. The world of digital espionage was more accessible than I'd imagined, with tools available for download by anyone with basic computer skills. The first breakthrough came when I found Tom's personal journal hidden in his filing cabinet behind tax documents from 2010. I'd been looking for our insurance policies after Dr. Chen suggested I inventory our assets in case I needed to leave suddenly, and stumbled across a leather-bound notebook I'd never seen before. The entries revealed months of growing resentment and disturbing fantasies that painted me as the source of all our family's problems. February 15th. Laura announced she's applying for the principal position at her school. She didn't even discuss it with me first, just informed me of her decision like I'm some boarder she keeps around for convenience. If she gets that promotion, she'll be making nearly twice what I earn. How am I supposed to maintain any authority in this relationship when my wife out-earns me by such a significant margin? February 22nd. Neighborhood party last night was humiliating. Jim Henderson made some comment about Laura being the real breadwinner in our family, asked if I was going to be a house husband soon. Everyone laughed like it was the funniest thing they'd ever heard. I wanted to disappear into the floor. Laura didn't even seem to notice how uncomfortable the situation was for me. March 1st. Had another session with Dr. Martinez today. He keeps talking about communication and finding healthy compromises. But he doesn't understand that Laura doesn't respect me anymore. She makes unilateral decisions, dismisses my concerns, treats me like I'm just another child she has to manage. Something fundamental has to change in our family dynamic. The entries grew darker and more specific as they progressed, describing detailed fantasies about putting Laura in her place and teaching her the humility she needs to be a proper wife and mother. March 8th. Alex is struggling more than we initially realized. Found him crying in the garage yesterday. He sent out over 300 job applications, with only a handful of responses, all rejections. Laura keeps offering advice like he's one of her fourth graders, which makes him feel even more pathetic and dependent. Maybe his situation could be useful in addressing our larger family problems. He needs to learn to be a man, and Laura needs to learn to respect the men in her life. The final entry dated March 12th was chilling in its casual discussion of what I now understood had been a planned assault. Tomorrow we implement the plan we've been discussing. Alex understands what needs to be done, not because he wants to hurt his mother, but because he understands that she's hurt both of us with her dismissive attitude and constant need to be in control. After this intervention, Laura will think twice before dismissing my authority or treating our son like a failure. Sometimes love requires difficult actions. I photographed every page with my phone hands shaking so violently that some images came out blurred and had to be retaken. But I had enough to document Tom's premeditation, his manipulation of Alex's vulnerabilities, and his twisted justification for orchestrating my assault. The journal also referenced therapy sessions with Dr. Richard Martinez, a psychologist I'd never heard Tom mention. According to the entries, Tom had been seeing Dr. Martinez for 8 months, supposedly for help with work stress and marital communication issues. But Tom's interpretation of the therapy sessions seemed dangerously distorted. While Dr. Martinez had apparently suggested communication exercises and couples counseling to address Tom's feelings of inadequacy, Tom had heard validation for increasingly controlling and vindictive behavior toward me. Installing keylogger software on our home computer was the most terrifying thing I'd ever done. Every footstep in the house made me jump, certain Tom or Alex would discover what I was doing and realize I was building a case against them. I chose a program called Stealth Keylogger that could run invisibly in the background, recording every keystroke, password, and website visit. The installation took only minutes, but those minutes felt like hours as I listened for sounds from upstairs, where Tom and Alex were supposedly watching a baseball game. After a week of monitoring, I had passwords to email accounts I'd never known existed. Tom's primary Gmail account was just the tip of the iceberg. He also maintained accounts under fake names for correspondence he wanted to keep completely secret from me. The hidden Gmail account, Watchful Protector 2015, contained correspondence with someone called Secure Tech Pro about surveillance installation and monitoring services. The messages used coded language, but their meaning became clear when I cross-referenced them with Tom's journal entries and the timeline of his suspicious behavior. Package delivered successfully to residential location. Subject unaware of monitoring capabilities. Remote access confirmed and functioning properly. Excellent work! Proceed to Phase 2 when target is in optimal position for behavioral modification intervention. Behavioral modification session completed successfully. Subject showing expected submission responses. Recommend maintaining current monitoring intensity to ensure lasting behavioral changes. The clinical language made my stomach turn. They were discussing me like I was a laboratory rat in a psychology experiment, an experimental subject whose behavior needed to be modified through calculated trauma. But the most damning evidence came when I accessed Tom's SecureTech cloud account using passwords captured by the keylogger. What I found there destroyed any remaining hope that this had been a spontaneous family crisis or isolated incident. Multiple folders contained surveillance footage from our home videos of me cooking, cleaning, reading, going about daily activities in spaces I'd believed were completely private. The camera quality was surprisingly high, suggesting professional-grade equipment rather than the simple security system Tom had described. But the bathroom surveillance folder made me physically ill. Dozens of videos of me showering, changing clothes in moments of complete vulnerability that I'd never imagined were being recorded and stored for Tom's viewing pleasure. The camera must have been incredibly well hidden, even knowing it existed. I had trouble identifying its location when I studied the bathroom footage. Tom had apparently installed it during that weekend when I'd visited Marie, positioning it to capture everything that happened in our private spaces. But the worst discovery was footage from March 13th, not just the assault itself, but Tom's real-time text messages to Alex before, during, and after the attack. The timestamps on the messages matched perfectly with my memory of events, creating an undeniable record of premeditation and coordination. 6:42 p.m. She's starting her evening routine. Position yourself near the bathroom door and wait for my signal. 6:47 p.m. She's in the shower now. Remember what we discussed: firm but not unnecessarily violent. The goal is psychological submission, not serious physical injury. 6:53 p.m. Now, execute the plan exactly as we practiced. Make sure she understands this is about respect and family hierarchy. 7:08 p.m. Well done. Clean up and act completely normal. She'll be too ashamed to tell anyone, and this will reset the power dynamic in our house permanently. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Tom had been watching me remotely from his phone, directing Alex's actions like a film director choreographing a scene. This wasn't family dysfunction or a communication breakdown. It was calculated psychological warfare designed to break my spirit and establish absolute control over my behavior. I spent hours copying everything to encrypted flash drives, printing the most crucial documents, and organizing evidence in ways that would be comprehensible to police and prosecutors. The sheer volume of material was staggering: months of surveillance footage, hundreds of text messages, journal entries detailing the planning process, financial records showing payments to surveillance companies. Armed with this overwhelming evidence, I knew I needed legal counsel before approaching police. I contacted Jennifer Walsh, an attorney specializing in family violence cases, whose name I'd found in the domestic violence resources Dr. Chen had provided. Walsh's office was in a downtown Seattle high-rise professional and intimidating in ways that made me feel like I was preparing for battle rather than seeking justice. When I spread my evidence across her conference table, her expression shifted from professional courtesy to genuine shock. "Mrs. Peterson," she said, after reviewing several flash drives and document folders, "this is one of the most comprehensive evidence collections I've seen from a victim in 20 years of practice. The digital surveillance, the real-time coordination, the documented premeditation, it's unprecedented in my experience. Does that make prosecution more likely? It makes conviction virtually certain, assuming you're prepared for what this will cost you personally. Prosecuting your husband and son will destroy your family as you know it, subject you to intense scrutiny and character assassination, and likely end your teaching career. There's no going back from accusations this serious. My family was already destroyed the moment they decided to violate me." I replied, surprised by the strength in my own voice. "I'm just making the destruction official and ensuring they face consequences for their choices." Walsh explained the legal process in detail, the likely charges, defense strategies I could expect, and the emotional toll of a trial where I'd have to testify about intimate details of the assault. She also warned me about social consequences I hadn't fully considered. "Defense attorneys will attack every aspect of your character and credibility," she continued. "The fact that you waited weeks to report that you conducted your own investigation, that you have financial independence that threatens traditional gender roles, all of it will be used to paint you as vindictive rather than victimized. I understand the risks, but I have evidence they can't discredit or explain away. Evidence is powerful, but juries are human. They want to believe that families don't do these things to each other. Your case challenges fundamental assumptions about how parents, spouses, and children are supposed to behave toward each other. Despite the warnings, I was determined to move forward. The alternative, living with the secret, pretending the assault never happened, allowing Tom and Alex to continue their psychological campaign of control and humiliation, was unthinkable. Reporting the assault to Seattle Police Department's Special Victims Unit on May 20th, 2015, required every ounce of courage I'd rebuilt during weeks of investigation and therapy. Detective Maria Rodriguez, a woman about my age with gentle eyes and graying hair pulled back in a professional bun, listened to my story with patience I didn't expect from law enforcement. Her office was small and cluttered with case files, family photos, and certificates recognizing her work with domestic violence victims. The environment felt more like a counselor's office than a police station, which helped me feel less like a criminal reporting a crime and more like a victim seeking justice. Mrs. Peterson, I have to ask some difficult questions. She began, her voice kind but professional. Why did you wait over 2 months to report this assault? Because I was in shock and couldn't believe my own family would conspire to hurt me this way. Because I knew how incredible this would sound without substantial evidence. Because I was terrified of destroying my son's future over something I wasn't sure anyone would believe. And why did you conduct your own investigation instead of calling us immediately after the incident? Because I knew you'd ask exactly the questions you're asking now. A middle-aged woman claiming her husband and son conspired to sexually assault her. Without overwhelming evidence who would believe such a story, I needed proof that would be undeniable. Detective Rodriguez nodded slowly, her expression sympathetic but professional as she reviewed the flash drives and printed documents I'd brought. The evidence you've collected is extraordinary. Most victims don't have the resources or technical knowledge to document crimes this thoroughly. You've essentially built our entire case for us. I'm a teacher. Research and documentation are part of my professional skill set, and I had time 2 months of living with the secret while gathering proof. The medical examination was difficult and somewhat pointless. So much time had passed that physical evidence was minimal. But the psychological evaluation confirmed severe trauma consistent with sexual assault by trusted family members, and the digital evidence was overwhelming enough to compensate for the lack of physical proof. Mrs. Peterson, Detective Rodriguez said after spending hours reviewing my evidence, I want you to know that this is one of the strongest domestic violence cases I've seen in 20 years of police work. The premeditation, the surveillance, the real-time coordination between perpetrators, it's all documented beyond any reasonable doubt. Within days, warrants were issued for Tom and Alex's arrests. Tom was taken into custody at Morrison & Associates on a Tuesday morning, handcuffed in front of colleagues who'd known him for 15 years. According to Detective Rodriguez, he maintained his innocence, even as police read him charges of conspiracy, sexual assault, illegal surveillance, and psychological abuse. Now this is insane, he told the arresting officers according to their report. My wife is having some kind of breakdown. She's making up these elaborate stories because she's angry about family financial decisions and my son's unemployment situation. Alex turned himself in after his court-appointed lawyer advised cooperation rather than forcing police to arrest him at home. I wasn't present for his surrender, but Detective Rodriguez told me he sobbed throughout the booking process, alternating between claiming innocence and begging officers to let him call his father. The local media picked up the story quickly. It wasn't every day that a respected accountant and his recent college graduate son were arrested for conspiring to sexually assault their wife and mother. The headlines were sensational, but generally factual. Father and son charged in domestic assault conspiracy. Hidden camera evidence reveals family plot. My name was kept out of initial reports due to victim privacy laws, but anyone who knew our family could easily identify me as the victim. The shame was crushing, walking through grocery stores and wondering who had read the stories, who was judging me for staying quiet so long, who thought I must have done something to deserve this treatment. The trial began in February 2017, nearly 2 years after the assault. Those intervening months were the darkest of my life, living with my sister Marie in Portland, unable to work due to the scandal that had followed me from Seattle, watching lawyers prepare to dissect my family's most private moments in public court. Tom hired James Richardson, a defense attorney known for representing wealthy men accused of domestic violence. Richardson was everything I'd expected. Expensive suit silver hair, commanding presence that suggested he'd never met a victim he couldn't blame for their own assault. His strategy was predictable but potentially effective. Paint me as an unstable woman fabricating elaborate revenge fantasies to punish her family for imagined slights and threatened masculinity. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Richardson said in his opening statement, gesturing toward me with practiced sympathy, "Laura Peterson wants you to believe that her loving husband of 30 years and her devoted son, a young man with no criminal record, an honor student who graduated summa cum laude, conspired to commit the most heinous crime imaginable against their own family member." He paused for effect, letting the absurdity of the accusation sink in. "But the evidence will show that this is a woman scorned, angry that her husband dared to assert traditional authority in his own home, vindictive toward a son who couldn't live up to her impossibly high expectations. The digital evidence she claims to have discovered was fabricated during months of obsessive planning, designed to destroy the men in her life who had disappointed her." Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh painted a very different picture in her opening statement. "The evidence will show you a calculated campaign of psychological terror orchestrated by Thomas Peterson against his wife, using their son as an unwilling weapon in his war for control and dominance. This wasn't a family dispute that got out of hand or a communication breakdown that led to misunderstandings. This was domestic terrorism carefully planned and expertly executed by a man who couldn't accept his wife's success and independence. Taking the stand was the most excruciating experience of my life." Walsh guided me through my testimony with professional compassion, but I could feel the jury's eyes on me, some sympathetic, others skeptical, all trying to determine if I was a victim or a vindictive woman destroying her family. "Mrs. Peterson, please tell the jury what happened on the evening of March 13th, 2015, Walsh began. I took a deep breath and started with Tom's phone call about working late, Alex's unusual offer to cook dinner, my decision to shower before helping with meal preparation. When I reached the assault itself, several jurors looked uncomfortable, one elderly woman dabbing at her eyes with a tissue while others stared at their hands. "Can you describe your son's demeanor during the attack?" He seemed angry but also detached, like he was following a script someone else had written. He said specific things about respect and authority that didn't sound like his natural way of speaking. It felt rehearsed, practiced. "What did he say specifically?" "That I thought I ran the house, that my salary made me think I was the boss of everyone, that I didn't control them anymore. These weren't ideas that came from Alex, they were ideas that had been planted in his mind." Richardson's cross-examination was brutal, lasting 2 full days, as he attacked every decision I'd made, every delay in reporting, every choice that didn't fit his narrative of the perfect victim who responds exactly as society expects. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Peterson, that you were jealous of your husband's successful career while you struggled with classroom management issues?" "No, that's not true. I loved teaching and was successful at it for over 20 years. I won Teacher of the Year awards and developed curriculum used throughout the district." "Isn't it true that you resented your son's dependence on you and wanted him out of the house?" "Absolutely not. I wanted Alex to find meaningful work and build his own life, but I never resented supporting him during his job search. That's what families do." "Then why, Mrs. Peterson, did you wait over 2 months to report this alleged assault? Why conduct an elaborate investigation instead of immediately calling police like any normal victim would?" This was the question I'd prepared for, the challenge that could make or break the prosecution's case. "Because I loved them," I said, looking directly at the jury rather than at Richardson. "Because I couldn't believe that the people I'd devoted my life to could do something so evil. Because shame is a powerful weapon, and they wielded it expertly against me." I paused, gathering strength for the most important part of my answer. "Because I knew that without overwhelming evidence, no one would believe that a husband and son could conspire to destroy their wife and mother." I knew people would ask exactly the questions you're asking, now would assume I must have done something to deserve this treatment or bring it on myself. But you're asking this jury to believe an incredible story about hidden cameras and coordinated assault plans. I'm not asking them to believe anything. I'm presenting evidence that speaks for itself. The cameras, the text messages, the journal entries, none of that can be explained away as a woman's fantasy or vindictive fabrication. When the videos were played in closed court, the jury judge and essential personnel, only the reaction was immediate and visceral. Several jurors gasped audibly when Tom's voice could be heard directing Alex's actions in real time. Others looked physically sick as the surveillance footage revealed the extent of violation I'd endured without my knowledge or consent. Tom's face went ashen as his own voice condemned him beyond any possibility of denial. For the first time since this nightmare began, his confident facade cracked, completely revealing the frightened, desperate man beneath the carefully constructed mask. Alex sobbed openly throughout the video presentation, perhaps finally understanding the full magnitude of what he'd participated in and the permanent damage it had caused to our family. The electronic evidence was devastating and impossible to dispute. Walsh methodically presented the text messages, camera footage, Tom's journal entries, revealing his twisted motivations, and the financial records showing payments to surveillance companies and equipment purchases. This wasn't a moment of passion or a family dispute that escalated beyond reasonable boundaries, she told the jury in closing arguments. This was a calculated assault on a wife and mother by the two people who should have protected her above all others. They turned her home into a prison, her family into predators, and then tried to make her believe she was crazy for fighting back. Defense arguments fell flat against the mountain of digital proof. Richardson tried to argue that the hidden investigation made the evidence inadmissible, claiming entrapment and violation of privacy rights. Alex's attorney, Carol Kim, painted him as a vulnerable young man manipulated by an abusive father who'd exploited his job search desperation and mental health struggles. Alex Peterson is as much a victim as his mother, Kim argued in her closing statement. He was systematically groomed and coerced by a controlling father who used financial threats and psychological manipulation to force participation in this horrific crime. But the jury heard Alex's own recorded words expressing genuine resentment toward me, his willingness to participate in teaching me a lesson, and his casual discussion of my humiliation with his father. Whatever sympathy they might have felt for his situation was overshadowed by evidence of his active, willing participation. After 3 days of deliberation that felt like 3 years, Judge Patricia Harrison read the verdicts guilty on all charges for both defendants. Tom received 12 years in state prison for conspiracy, sexual assault, illegal surveillance, psychological abuse, and violation of privacy. Alex received 8 years as a co-conspirator with eligibility for parole after serving 60% of his sentence if he successfully completed rehabilitation programs. The courtroom was silent, except for Alex's continued sobbing. Tom stared straight ahead, his face emotionless, as if he still couldn't believe that his carefully planned strategy had failed so completely. Judge Harrison allowed me to make a victim impact statement, an opportunity I'd prepared for, but still found overwhelming when the moment arrived. Your Honor, these men tried to break me in secret, convinced that shame would keep me silent forever. They underestimated my capacity for investigation, my determination to seek justice, and my refusal to be destroyed by people who claimed to love me. I paused, looking at Tom and Alex one final time. Their darkness only strengthened my resolve, not just to hold them accountable, but to help other victims who suffer similar betrayals in silence. I hope other survivors see that justice is possible, even when it comes at the cost of everything you once held dear. Tom stared at me with empty eyes as bailiffs led him away in shackles. Alex looked back, once tears streaming, mouthing words I couldn't hear, and chose not to try to understand. That was the last time I saw either of them in person. After the trial, I filed for divorce and moved permanently to Portland to start over near my sister Marie. The divorce was finalized quickly. Tom had no leverage left to contest asset division, and there were no custody issues that required ongoing contact. Selling our Seattle house was emotionally difficult, but financially necessary. I couldn't bear to live in a place where I'd been violated, where every room held memories of deception and betrayal, where cameras had recorded my most private moments without my knowledge or consent. The house sold within 2 weeks to a young family with twin daughters who reminded me of students I'd taught over the years. I felt sorry for them buying a home with such dark history, but I hoped they would fill it with the love and safety it had lacked during its final years as my prison. The proceeds, combined with my teacher's pension and settlement from Tom's assets, gave me financial independence to start over at 55, something many women in my situation don't have the privilege of achieving. Therapy with Dr. Patricia Wells became my lifeline during this transition period. She specialized in family trauma and understood that healing from betrayal by loved ones requires different strategies than recovering from stranger assault. When family members violate you, she explained during one of our early sessions, they don't just attack your body, they attack your fundamental ability to trust your own judgment about the people closest to you. They make you question everything you thought you knew about love, safety, and family bonds. The support group for family violence survivors that Dr. Wells recommended became another crucial component of my healing process. Meeting other people whose worst nightmares had come from inside their own homes helped me realize I wasn't uniquely cursed or somehow responsible for my family's choices. The shame belongs to them, not to you, said Margaret, a 60-year-old grandmother, whose brother had sexually assaulted her repeatedly during family gatherings over several years. They made the choice to hurt you. Your only choice is how to respond to that hurt and whether you let it define your future. By 2018, I'd found my voice as an advocate and was ready to share my story publicly. I started a blog called Family Betrayal Survivors, writing about my experience and connecting with other victims who'd suffered in silence because they thought no one would believe their impossible stories. The response was overwhelming, hundreds of messages from people who'd never told anyone about abuse by parents, siblings, spouses, or children. Many had been keeping secrets for decades, protecting family reputations while suffering from PTSD, depression, and other trauma-related conditions. Your courage gave me courage, one woman wrote. I've been keeping my father's sexual abuse secret for 30 years, protecting the family reputation while suffering alone. Reading your story made me realize that family loyalty shouldn't protect predators, and that speaking up might help other people in similar situations. Another message came from a man whose wife had been sexually assaulting his teenage daughter while he was at work. I thought I was the only person dealing with this kind of family nightmare. Your story showed me that I'm not crazy for wanting to protect my child, even if it means destroying my marriage and extended family relationships. In 2019, I founded Family Betrayal Survivors Network, a nonprofit organization providing resources specifically for people victimized by relatives. Traditional domestic violence resources often focused on intimate partner violence, leaving a significant gap for people dealing with assault, abuse, or exploitation by parents, children, siblings, or extended family members. The work was challenging but deeply meaningful. Family violence survivors face unique obstacles that distinguish their experiences from other forms of abuse, social pressure to maintain family secrets, financial dependence on perpetrators, and complex psychological trauma that makes them question their own perceptions of reality and their right to seek justice. We offered legal referrals to attorneys experienced with family violence cases, connections to therapists who understood this specific type of trauma, and most importantly, support groups where people could share their stories without judgment or pressure to forgive and forget for the sake of family unity. Traditional therapy often pushes reconciliation and forgiveness as necessary components of healing. I explained to a reporter writing about our organization. But sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is permanently separate from family members who've hurt you. We support whatever choice helps survivors heal and rebuild their lives safely. The nonprofit grew rapidly, serving survivors across the Pacific Northwest and developing online resources for people in areas without local support services. We lobbied for legal changes that would better protect family violence victims, worked with law enforcement to improve training about these complex cases, and provided expert testimony in court cases where family dynamics were being misunderstood or minimized. I met Mark Davidson at a victim advocacy conference in 2020 during the challenging months when COVID-19 had forced most support services online. He'd lost his wife to domestic violence 3 years earlier. She'd been murdered by her ex-husband despite having a restraining order, and had dedicated his retirement to supporting other survivors and advocating for legal reforms. Our relationship developed slowly, built on mutual understanding of how trauma affects the ability to trust and form new relationships. Mark understood my hypervigilance, my need to control my environment, my occasional panic attacks triggered by unexpected sounds or situations that reminded me of those months when I'd lived in fear of discovery. "I'm not trying to replace what you lost or fix what was broken," Mark told me during one of our early conversations over coffee in a Portland cafe. "I'm hoping we can create something new together based on honesty and respect instead of the illusions that destroyed our previous relationships." Mark never pressured me to get over my trauma or move faster than felt emotionally safe. He understood that healing isn't linear, that triggers can emerge unexpectedly, even years after the initial trauma, and that love sometimes means giving someone space to process their experiences without trying to rush them toward forgiveness or closure. We married in a small ceremony last spring, surrounded by the chosen family I'd built through advocacy work and genuine friendships forged in support groups and professional relationships. Marie walked me down the aisle, and several survivors I'd helped over the years served as witnesses to this new chapter in my life. The ceremony was simple, but meaningful. We wrote our own vows, focusing on honesty, respect, and supporting each other's continued healing and growth. Mark promised to never lie to me about anything, no matter how trivial it might seem. I promised to trust him with my fears and vulnerabilities instead of hiding them out of shame or self-protection. Last year, I received an unexpected letter from Alex at Cedar Creek Corrections Center. 6 years of therapy, education programs, and reflection had given him genuine insight into the manipulation he'd suffered and participated in, though I approached his words with cautious skepticism born from hard experience. "Mom." The letter began in handwriting I recognized from years of homework help and permission slips. "I understand if you never want to see me again. What I did was unforgivable, and I take full responsibility for my choices. But I need you to know that therapy has helped me understand how Dad groomed me from childhood, using my insecurities and failures to turn me into his weapon against you." The letter was 8 pages long, written with the careful consideration of someone who'd spent years thinking about these issues in therapy and educational programs. He described patterns of psychological manipulation that I'd been too close to see clearly, Tom praising Alex for masculine behavior while criticizing anything he perceived as weakness or sensitivity, gradually isolating him from friends who might have provided different perspectives about family dynamics, and finally exploiting his job search desperation to coerce participation in the assault. "I realize now that Dad started preparing me for this years ago," Alex wrote. "Every time he criticized you for being too independent, every time he complained about your career success, every time he made jokes about women who didn't know their place, he was programming me to see you as a threat to our family instead of the mother who'd sacrificed everything for my well-being." Alex had earned his bachelor's degree in social work through correspondence courses and was working as a peer counselor for other family violence offenders. The prison social worker had written a letter confirming his progress and genuine commitment to rehabilitation programs. "I work with other inmates who've committed crimes against family members," his letter continued. "I help them understand the long-term impact of their choices, how manipulation and abuse destroy families for generations. I can't undo what I did to you, but maybe I can prevent other sons from becoming what I became." The letter included contact information for his therapist and program coordinators, along with an invitation to participate in restorative justice sessions if I was ever interested. He emphasized that he expected nothing from me, no forgiveness, no relationship, No contact at all? If that's what I preferred for my own healing and safety. After discussing it extensively with Dr. Wells and Marks, he agreed to limited contact through supervised video calls, facilitated by the prison's Victim Services Program. The conversations have been difficult, filled with Alex's apparent genuine remorse and my complex feelings about the boy I raised versus the man who hurt me. I remember who you really were as a mother, Alex said during one of our supervised calls, his face older and more serious than the young man who'd assaulted me 6 years earlier. Kind, patient, supportive of my dreams, even when they seemed impossible to achieve. That's what makes what I did so much worse. I knew better, but I chose to let Dad turn me into someone I never wanted to be. Seeing him in prison garb, discussing his therapy insights and educational achievements, brings back painful memories of the confident college graduate who'd once had such bright prospects. But it also shows me someone taking genuine responsibility for his actions and working to prevent similar crimes through education and peer counseling. The conversations don't erase what happened or restore our relationship to what it once was, but they provide a different kind of closure, evidence that growth and change are possible even after the most devastating betrayals, and that accountability can coexist with acknowledgement of the factors that contributed to someone's choices. Tom, by contrast, has never attempted contact or shown any indication of remorse. According to victim services coordinators who provide quarterly updates, he maintains that he was the victim of an ungrateful wife's vindictiveness. He spends his days in minimum security working in the prison library, apparently still convinced that his actions were justified responses to my disrespectful behavior. Some perpetrators never develop empathy or genuine insight into their behavior, the coordinator explained during one of our quarterly phone calls. They maintain their victim narrative throughout incarceration and beyond. It's actually healthier for survivors when they don't attempt manipulation through fake apologies or contact attempts designed to restore their sense of control. Today, at 62, I'm writing this memoir from my Portland home, where morning light streams through windows I chose myself and door locks that only I control. The Family Betrayal Survivors Network has helped over 500 people navigate the complex trauma of family violence, connecting them with resources and reminding them they're not alone in their seemingly impossible experiences. My teaching career ended in scandal and shame, but my real education began in those dark months of investigation, trial, preparation, and recovery. I learned that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's speaking truth when fear tries to silence you, taking action when every instinct tells you to hide and protect the people who hurt you. I learned that family isn't defined by biology or legal documents, but by the choice to protect and cherish each other's well-being and dignity. The people who truly love you don't require your silence about the people who hurt you, don't ask you to sacrifice your safety for their comfort. Don't weaponize your love against your own best interests. Most importantly, I learned that healing doesn't require forgiveness or reconciliation. It requires accepting what happened without minimizing its impact. Understanding that it wasn't your fault, regardless of what others might claim, and choosing to build a life defined by your values rather than your trauma. The work continues to be challenging but meaningful. Last month, I testified before the state legislature about proposed changes to family violence laws that would provide better protection for victims and more comprehensive training for law enforcement. Next week, I'm speaking at a conference for social workers about identifying manipulation and coercive control in family systems. The nonprofit keeps me busy with support groups, legal advocacy, and training programs for professionals who work with family violence survivors. But I also have a rich personal life beyond advocacy work, something that seemed impossible during those dark months when survival was my only goal. Mark and I travel together, visit museums, take cooking classes that remind me that simple pleasures are still available to people who've survived terrible experiences. We're planning a trip to Ireland next spring, something I'd always wanted to do, but Tom had dismissed as unnecessary expense that didn't fit his vision of responsible financial planning. The scars remain both visible and invisible. I still check door locks twice before going to bed, keep my phone charged for emergencies that may never come, feel my heart rate spike when I hear unexpected footsteps in the hallway. But these responses don't control my life anymore. They're simply reminders of experiences that taught me valuable lessons about trust boundaries and self-protection. To anyone reading this who recognizes their own nightmare in my story, you are not responsible for their choices, but you are responsible for your own healing and safety. Document everything. Trust your instincts even when others doubt you. And remember that people who truly love you don't require your silence about people who hurt you. Find professional help from therapists who understand family trauma and don't automatically push forgiveness or reconciliation as necessary components of healing. Join support groups where your impossible story becomes believable because others have lived through similar horrors and understand the unique challenges of family betrayal.
Build new definitions of family based on choice, respect, and mutual care rather than obligation, manipulation, or biological connection. Some relationships can't be repaired and shouldn't be. That's not a failure on your part, but a recognition that protecting yourself sometimes requires permanent separation from people who've proven they'll hurt you. Most importantly, don't let shame silence you. Evil thrives in secrecy and isolation, but it cannot withstand the power of truth spoken by someone who refuses to be broken or controlled by fear of consequences.
My family tried to destroy me through calculated cruelty disguised as love. But instead, they revealed a strength I never knew I possessed. That strength has become my gift to others, walking similar paths, proof that even the darkest betrayals cannot extinguish the human capacity for healing, justice, and hope. The scars I carry tell a story of survival, not defeat. They remind me daily that I chose truth over comfort, justice over family loyalty, my own well-being over the protection of people who'd forfeited their right to my protection when they chose to harm me. If my story helps even one person find the courage to speak their truth, to seek help, to refuse to be silenced by shame or manipulation, then everything I endured will have had meaning beyond the pain it caused. We are not alone in our experiences of family betrayal. We are not helpless against manipulation and abuse, even when it comes from people we're supposed to trust most. We are not responsible for the evil that others choose to do in the name of love, authority, or family unity. But we are responsible for how we respond to that evil, and sometimes our response can light the way for others trapped in similar darkness, show them that escape is possible, that justice can be achieved, that healing can happen even after the most devastating betrayals. This is my truth. This is my victory over the people who tried to break me. This is my message to anyone who needs to hear it. You can survive this. You can heal from this. And you can use your survival to help others find their way out of darkness. The power to choose how your story ends belongs to you, not to the people who hurt you. Choose courage. Choose truth. Choose your own well-being over the comfort of people who've proven they don't deserve your protection. Choose to live.